Hi, I'm Dylan Davis, and I decided to spend 20 hours creating a short 5-minute first-person level in Unreal Engine 5 with a melee combat system. I limited myself to 20 hours to challenge myself and see how fast I can create a basic white box level with simple self-made mechanics and blueprints. I chose first-person melee because I wanted to refine my knowledge of level design from a first-person perspective, as your field of view, line of sight, and controls are affected by playing the game in first person. This can be seen in Resident Evil 8, where the game was initially designed to be played in first person. However, after the release of the DLC, the developers added a third person mode. The goals and rules I set out for the project include a first person game with a melee combat system, a focus on two mechanics, combat and platforming, strong use of verticality and cover points, essential for a close quarters level, 20 hours to create the project, and linear level design with a main objective. The project will be made in Unreal Engine 5.2.1, since many tutorials online such as melee combat, platforming, and more use that version, and I want to minimize as many version conflicts as possible. Since the focus is on the level design, I want to spend the majority of this short-scoped project on whiteboxing and adding sub-themes in the level, rather than creating game mechanics, as level design supports the game design. Considering the game is first-person and linear and the mechanics include melee combat and platforming, I decided that the level would be set in a UK secondary school. This scope is achievable in a zombie level, as rooms can always be blocked off or boarded off if they need to be cut for time, as the in-game reason for this can be justified as the protagonist thinking, "No need to visit the maths classroom, it's full of those monsters and I don't think trigonometry will help me anymore." Initially the project was made in 5.5, however I had to downgrade versions to 5.2 in order to convert the project into a first-person camera, as there were conflicts in the blueprints with newer versions. After creating the project, a new level was built alongside converting the third-person Unreal Engine 5 template to first-person with a basic attack system. The animations were taken from the free animation starter pack and sword animations from Epic Games on Fab. As a refresher, the level is set in a secondary school in the UK, theme is post-apocalyptic with zombies, the structure is linear starting in a bathroom. The primary objectives include escaping the school's interior buildings, reaching the outdoors of the school, and escaping through the front gate of the school to contact others for help. The extrinsic motivation is that the school is full of zombies that will kill and eat you if you stay there, whilst the intrinsic motivation is exploring an area to kill zombies and live in a world of undead escapism. As for progression, you start as a secondary school student in a toilet, passing out a couple of days after skipping class to smoke in the toilets. You got so little sleep the past few days that you fell asleep for over 2 days straight. Upon waking up, you hear monster noises and decide to investigate. Once you realise you're in a zombie school, you use your knowledge of the school to escape. You start on the ground floor and progress up to the first floor, then the second floor, then the roof, where you jump across to the back of the canteen. After entering the canteen, you spot the main entrance, but it is too infested with zombies to approach, so you need to take a longer route through the PE gym and the library connected to the canteen. After reaching the gym, a boss fight is encountered with more health and damage and a larger size, the PE teacher. After defeating him, you get his keys, which open the playground leading to the school exit. Here I have created a few sketches of the different plans of the level, trying to include both linear tutorial points whilst maintaining the logic of a school floor plan. Some common themes I found whilst researching school plans included: the canteen is often placed near the field or playground to filter a large amount of students between two large areas, as well as libraries being close to English and languages classes to encourage students learning, as books heavily relate to the languages. I am also trying to create this level without any outer feedback. The library is a good place for a cover tutorial or combat tutorial, as the bookshelves are above 2 meters tall and therefore you can be standing up and still be completely out of line of sight from the enemies. Here I have created a detailed node/Milan map with labels and more thorough planning based on the initial sketches and the mood boards created. I would have planned out additional rooms and areas of the school such as the assembly hall, food tech and computing rooms. However, I have already spent 5 hours on the project so far just planning and creating the base blueprint mechanics for the game, so my focus in the future is going to be on creating an initial block out of the level. I chose nighttime not only because horror games and zombies are more effective at scaring the player at night, but also because it means I need to make a stronger use of lighting and leading lines and colours to guide the player through the level. The plan now is to work on the main objective and save the last few hours for creating the side objective, which I plan to make a platforming challenge that rewards the player with either a health upgrade or a note from another student that provides some much needed world building and narrative. narrative. Games with side quests often should have the reward benefit the player either from a narrative or gameplay perspective. However, they should not be mandatory to complete in order to complete the main quest. Next, I started building the initial block out, as well as implementing all the final mechanics of the game. I added multiple randomized attack animations when clicking left mouse button, which is often the attack button in games, as well as supporting randomized attack sound effects that I recorded using Adobe Audition. I then created a basic AI zombie that follows the player using the Nurse Zombie free template also on Fab. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, I chose the Nurse Zombie despite not being set in the hospital, as this model and set of animations was free and the closest to a teacher or student with a set uniform that I could find. I then added a basic health system with UI for the player and the zombie AI, with the zombie having a lot of health. I gave the zombie much more health than the player damage, balanced around their low speed and slow attack animation, combined with the player's fast swings. I also found a free wooden plank which I felt was an appropriate improvised weapon a student could find in a school, potentially from DT and woodworking, which I used from Fab. After this, I created a flashlight with a sound effect when you enable and disable it, as well as adding footsteps which use the royalty-free footsteps sound available on Freesound. Freesound also provided me with some various zombie attack, idle, and other sound effects. I then added a basic health pickup system using the free medical kit mesh provided by Fab. I chose this mesh because a bright orange pickup will hopefully stand out against the grey box, catching the player's attention. Furthermore, if the enemies are zombies, the food doesn't make as much sense as a medical kit for healing. After adding a health pickup with an emissive glow to further help it stand out from the background, I made the pickup heal 60% of your health, as I want healing items to be relatively rare in a horror game. I then added a boss version of the zombie, inspired by the tank from Left 4 Dead. Due to time constraints, the audio and mesh will be the same, and the boss will only have one attack. However, I increased the scale of the boss and retextured the clothes to be a different colour from the standard enemies. I also then made its health over 5 times that of the enemies, and it does 40 damage to the player, with a Dark Souls inspired health bar that is visible at all times, adding tension to the game as you won't see the boss until you reach the gymnasium. After this, I added a crouch system using some animations imported previously to allow for secret rooms that normally aren't accessible. I then added a respawn system and fixed a health bug where the player was respawning with 1 health. This was fixed by resetting and duplicating the health system from a previous tutorial. Originally, I always tried to give the zombie boss the same health HUD as the regular zombie, however the arrays had incompatibility issues. I then added a vault system following a tutorial and using a free vault animation provided by That Sky on itch.io. Unfortunately, the vault system tutorial I followed uses a newer version of UE5, so the current vault system in 5.2, after being used once, causes a bug that disables collision and causes the character to keep moving forward. After spending nearly an hour on this issue, I recognised that gameplay is not the focus, and we have now got 8 hours remaining to complete the task, so the vault was scrapped. I have also added a stamina system with sprinting, where if you press and hold left shift to sprint, it reduces your stamina and you can only sprint for a limited amount of time. I also added this system to the attack animation, so that the player has to sacrifice some running stamina if they want to defeat zombies. Finally, I added a mission system that updates based on a trigger, with the main mission changing and allowing for multiple objectives throughout the level. I started the block out by creating the tutorial space with text teaching you the game's mechanics, and the first zombie being placed in a narrow corridor, forcing the player to engage with the game's mechanics due to the tight space of the level. I noticed that horror games often have small spaces to increase the intensity of the enemies and the fear factor. Next, I created a low vaultable table which was 1.2 meters wide, 1.2 meters tall, and 0.2 meters long. This can be used as a cover point, alongside being turned into an impassable wall over 3.5 meters tall. I also created a door that was over 2.5 meters tall, over 1.3 meters wide, and over 0.3 meters deep. The tables were used as a blockade, with the blue light catching the player's eye, notifying the player of where to go next. Upon leaving the toilet, the player gets their first main objective: find the headmaster. I added a crouching tutorial through a classroom with a crawl space static mesh coloured black similar to shut emergency gates on shop doors, which was 1.2 meters tall and wide. I then created the base of the first floor, using a much larger ceiling and orange grid material for the headmaster boss room, as gyms often have large ceilings. Furthermore, a gym allows for more space for the player to avoid 4 zombies and platform around to obtain healing items if they need it. I used the pushable cube meshes built into the template as a pushable object that can work as a makeshift breakable door. This way, players don't accidentally enter the boss room. I also placed the healing tutorial next to this blue door, as many games, especially role-playing games, have a safe healing space right before a boss fight. Due to feature creep, I downloaded a free fire system on Fab and added it to the science room to create some environmental hazards, as it introduces an additional aspect of avoiding taking damage that requires the player to explore the level's alternate paths to avoid damage. I then added various sound effects such as dialogue that I recorded to add some world building, as well as some royalty-free background music to amp up the spook factor by Kevin MacLeod. I also created a window mesh that has the appropriate proportions of a school window to add some directional lighting into the interiors a bit more. The proportions are between 1.2 meters and 1.5 meters from the floor, over half a meter in depth, and over 1.2 meters in height. I am creating the block out starting with walls and floors from each node map I created. First was the ground floor, followed by the first floor, after which was the roof, and finally the school outskirts. After adding windows to all the buildings, I added the roof platforms with more zombies and healing items, as previously there was only one healing item in the level. I also started implementing larger environmental fires to mitigate the issue of players walking to areas with little to no gameplay, as well as adding gates and blocking volumes around the map, as previously the player could jump over the gate and escape the map. Next, many car static meshes were created, with the first point of interest static mesh, the school bus, coloured in yellow to be eye-catching like the fire. I also added a plethora of zombies to the outdoor background playground to increase the difficulty as you progress through the level. Furthermore, the lighting was changed to evening to test out the indoor lighting. Finally, I added the swimming pool, canteen and cafeteria and the garden field to the back gate exit. I also added some background buildings to give the level further depth and the illusion of being fully open and explorable, and a basic wind scene that loads after escaping through the back gate. The swimming pool, big tree and bus are all optional points of interest, however they reward the player with rare healing items if they complete the necessary platforming and or combat challenges. I also playtested the level and included optional areas whilst avoiding most outdoor zombies, and the level is roughly 5 minutes long. Next, I started polishing the level. I started adding a lot more leading lines through the primary path, as well as modifying the lighting, since the level has a fair amount of orange damaging fires that discourage certain routes, as well as orange contrasting blue hues. I decided to make any optional areas have orange and red lighting to subconsciously let players know they were entering optional areas. I also created 2 broken buildings that are much taller than the other buildings, and shaped them in a position that is eye-catching and enhances the big tree and exit as a focal point to mitigate the player getting lost. I then added zombie blood splatters that work as leading lines and breadcrumbing along the floor of the main path, guiding the player from the indoors to the outdoors. Whilst adding polish and filling the school interior optional rooms with meshes and health packs, I realised I was really short on time, so I had to download some free gym assets again from Fab to quickly fill in the boss room as much as possible to give the player some cover points and verticality options to further avoid attacks. Finally, I added a side mission where the player must find their sister. I then cooked and built the project with a very bare bones menu system and win level working. After spending 20 hours on documentation, whiteboxing, blueprinting and planning, I learnt not only how to create a melee first-person horror game, but also how in comparison to full releases, 20 hours is not a lot of time, which forced me to think critically about what really mattered to the level. Unfortunately, various features had to be cut for time, and if I were to continue working on the project afterwards, here is a list of additions I could make. More detailed and thorough documentation and planning with a node map of the side viewpoint of the school, more unique sound effects and audio, the boss having a unique speed, mesh, attacks and rewards, the side mission providing stronger permanent equipment upgrades, helpful NPCs that provide dialogue and world building and giving tips about gameplay such as zombies not being able to spot you from attacking from behind, a battery system for the flashlight, various optimization methods such as reducing the number of fire VFX, an equipment system, new enemy types, a climbing system, a key and lock door puzzle, gamepad support, added points of interest and landmarks such as a school statue that I initially included in my mood board, increased verticality such as turning the school field into an editable landscape rather than a flat plane, a method of increasing the max health or stamina, cover points actually affecting the zombie's vision, currently once an enemy spots you they never stop approaching you, various bug fixes, and more breadcrumbing techniques such as maybe having crows only appear in areas of interest that you haven't yet interacted with, inspired once again by Resident Evil. In summation, considering this was a solo project with a relatively short time span and many features I had previously not played around with before, such as the stamina system, I am proud of the level I created. In hindsight, I definitely could have added more mandatory platforming and crouching segments, and without fall damage implemented, the player could avoid certain mission triggers. However, I believe overall this project has been a success, especially without any feedback. Thanks for watching.